Hi everyone, this is WWD2 and you're most welcome for it. In order for you to do data analysis very well, you need a proper data set or a data that is set properly. And if you have a proper data set, it makes it like 10 times easier for you to do data analysis using that data than if it's not a proper data set. That's why in this video I'm going to show you more than 8 different things you can do to your data set to make it a proper data set. Let's switch on to it and we start from number 1. Now someone might see this table not having borders and this one having borders and thinks that's actually number 1. But that's not actually the case. Having borders around your data set or around your table doesn't add anything to your data set except making it look good or being a little bit more organized. But apart from that, it adds nothing to your table. Now because of that, let's look a little bit organized. I'm going to highlight this, come to the Home tab, Font Group, and then this is border. When I click on it, I'm going to come to all borders. You can give it any of these borders, but I'm going to come to all borders. Now, before we even go to number 1, let's first get to understand and know what makes up a data set. A data set is actually made up of fields that's always put in columns. So this is a name field, this is application number field, and this one is the salary expectation field. Apart from fields, we have records that's always stored in rows. Like for example, this is the first record in this data set. This is the third record in this data set. And it goes on like that. In Excel, we call it a cell, but within a data set, that one is actually a data point. This is actually a data point. This is another data point. This is another data point. So we have fields, records, and then data point. So the first thing you need to do to your data set, make sure all your fields is having a field name. So this is application number field having a field name application number. This is the name field, so the field name is name. This is the gender field, so the field name is gender, and so on like that. Then secondly, make sure the field name is formatted in a way that differentiates it from the rest of the records. Like for our case, we have just bolded it, and that one is actually a very common way of formatting your field names. Then 3, make sure the first row of your table is having the field names. So you cannot have your field names on the second row. Make sure the field name is always stored on the first row of your table or of your data set. Now number 4, if your table or your data set is having a primary key, make sure the primary key is stored on the first field of your table. What exactly is the primary key? Let's get to understand that. Actually, database can have very many keys, and we're not going to talk about keys right now. That one is actually going to be a topic of its own video. But let's just get to introduce primary keys so that we get to understand what exactly I'm meaning by primary key. A primary key is a field that uniquely identifies each and every records in your dataset. Now, like for example, if we see the name field here, you can realize that we have Kule Peter here and we also have another Kule Peter here. That makes the name field not to be a primary key because you cannot use the name field now to uniquely identify the records in that dataset. Now when you come to the application number, each and every record is having its own application number. U1 belongs to Chong Nelson. And by the way, a record should have related information. So for the application number U1, it only belongs to Chong Nelson. It doesn't belong to any other interviewee except Chong Nelson. The same applies to U4, only belongs to Namaganda. It doesn't belong to anyone else. So that makes application number a primary key because it can uniquely identify any records from this data set. So that's a primary key. So you need to make sure your primary key is actually stored on the first field of your table. So we are on proper dataset 1 worksheet. So let's click on proper dataset 2 worksheet. I'm going to click on it. So another is that make sure you doesn't have any empty row within your data set. Now this is what I'm meaning. You have this same table, but if you check, there's an empty row within the data set. The entire row is empty. That split the table into 2 and it can make data analysis actually very difficult. For example, if I want to highlight the entire table, if I click on any of the cell in the table, then I try to do Control A to highlight the table, you can see that only the upper part of the table is highlighted, meaning the downer part is acting as its own table. That's because of this empty row that's separating the tables. The same applies to empty column. You shouldn't also have an empty column within your data set. If I click on this cell, this time around I'm going to highlight it using Control asterisk. You can see It also highlights just part of the table and leave the other part of the table. So make sure it doesn't have any empty row or empty column within your table. Now I'm going to click on Proper Dataset 1 worksheet. I'm going to click, then I come here. Now what we have talked about so far applies to datasets when you're going to use it on very many data analysis tools. But now when you are using your dataset on Excel, you should have empty cells all around your dataset. Like for example, this is our dataset and I have all these cells are empty. This is what I'm meaning by empty cells all around your dataset. Or you can have your dataset touching the row header or the column header. Like for example, if I come to Proper Dataset 2 worksheet, we have this dataset here which is having empty cells all around it, and also it's touching the row header and the column header. That one is also okay. So I'm going to click Proper Dataset 1 worksheet. Another thing is that you shouldn't have anything touching your dataset. That makes whatever is touching your dataset part of the dataset or part of the table. Now like this table here, if you check very well, I'm going to first increase this row. So I'm going to come here. When I see this cursor, I'm going to click and drag down to increase that row. When I release it, you can see, let me also increase the column like this. Now you can see that we have put this note which is touching the dataset or touching the table. So that makes the note also part of the table. Like for example, if I click on this, then I try to highlight the table using Control A, you can see that even the row that's having the note is being highlighted, meaning it's also part of the table. And that's not what we want. So you always have to make sure it doesn't have anything touching your table. I'm going to use the move cursor. I'm going to drag to the edge. When I see the move cursor, this is the move cursor. I'm going to click and drag it up so that nothing can touch our table. Now, apart from having empty rows or empty columns within your data set, also make sure that you try hard not to have empty cells within your data set or empty data points within your data set. Now, if I click on Proper Dataset 2 worksheet, you can see that I'm having this data set here. I'm going to scroll down a bit. Let me even scroll down further. I have this data set here and it's having this empty cell or empty data point, and also there's also this empty data point. Now, if it's not the entire empty row or entire empty column, sometimes it doesn't bring a lot of problems, but always try hard not to have empty data points or empty cell also within your data set. And most especially when it comes to the primary key, you shouldn't have any empty cell or empty data point within your primary key. I want to show you why exactly you should avoid this. So I'm going to highlight this table, Control C to copy it. I'm going to click on this new sheet tab, click to create a new sheet. Then I'm going to Control V to paste it there. So I'm simply going to highlight from the column header. I'm going to highlight, then go to any of those tables, double click to automatically resize everything. Now I want to show you what happens if you have these empty data points within your data set. I'm going to get the average age of these interviewees. You need to get the sum of the entire records, then you divide it by the count of the records. So here we're going to get the sum, then here we're going to get the count of the records. So I'm going to come here, then do equals to sum. When I see it highlighted in blue, I'm going to hit tab to select the sum function. We need to put there the number 1, number 2, but I'm simply going to highlight it because we are allowed also to highlight it. So I'm going to highlight the entire range, and when I click enter, the sum is 374. So let's also do the count. So I'm going to use the counter function. The count counts the number of cells in a range that contains numbers only. But since you're having some empty cell, I'm going to use the second option, the counter with a. Counts the number of cells in a range that are not empty. So I'm going to hit tab to select it. Since we're having empty cell within the age field, I'm going to highlight the gender field. If I highlight the gender field, then I click enter, you can see we have 11 records. Now this is actually a very small data set. We can even count manually, but we're having 11 records. So here I'm going to get the average tab. The average is going to be equals to the sum divided by up arrow the count. When I hit enter, you can see the average age is 34 years. Now let's try also to use the average function, and then we see what we get. Equals to average tab to select it. So I'm going to highlight the age field, and when I click enter, so we're getting different averages. That's because the average function is actually programmed to ignore empty cells. And another one is that if you're storing your dataset in Excel, make sure you store it as an Excel table. And it's actually very easy. When you click within your dataset, you simply need to go to insert, and then you click on table. The create table dialog box will appear. I'm actually going to first cancel it. The keyboard shortcut to create a table is Ctrl T. And by the way, if I hit escape, there's also Ctrl L that was used long time ago, but it still works. It brings for you the same dialog box. You need to make sure my table as headers is selected, then you click OK. It creates for you an Excel table. So this is actually an Excel table. So I'm simply going to come to the design tab, come to table name, then I'm going to click and rename this to interviewee data and hit enter. This is now the Excel table. Yeah, that is it for this video. If you haven't subscribed, please do subscribe. And if you found this video interesting, give it a like, then you share it with your friends. If you haven't watched our previous video where we talked about WWD series and what it's all about, click this video, then you go and watch it. Until next video, WWD 3, then we meet again. Thank you.